So you all remember Disney's not-so-secret gay agenda, right? That's a bit of a throwback. Well, now it seems, according to activists, Disney is unveiling their new not-so-secret straight agenda because they just offered a first look at a new short film animation project called Versa. And the only images we have so far show a heterosexual couple in this short film where you can see the woman in the animation is pregnant. And it's described as a young couple living a range of emotions from loss and mourning to supreme joy while embarking on an ethereal cosmic dance of life, which is incredibly vague. But the inspiration behind this story was actually autobiographical on the part of a Disney animator named Malcolm Pierce. And he explained how this story is deeply personal to him, and he pitched it as something that was inspired by events in his own life with his wife. He said during the making of Moana, him and his wife lost their infant son, Cooper. In grieving their loss, Pierce was inspired to tell their story. Their son's baby shower theme revolved around stars, and his mother-in-law gifted the couple a crystal star, which was placed in their kitchen window. He said every morning we'd come downstairs and all of these rainbows would be spread around the house from the star, and it became a way of remembering Cooper and keeping him close to us. And that was the beginning of his inspiration for the story and the way that they animated it. There's no dialogue in it. It's telling the story through dance, from what I gathered while reading the piece. Look, I don't think Disney should continue leaning into these autobiographical stories on the part of their writers and animators. Turning Red is another example of that. And it didn't do well for obvious reasons. I also don't, I'm not decided one way or another, but I lean toward thinking maybe the subject of miscarriage and infant loss of that shouldn't be, and it didn't do well. Why am I hearing my own voice? Shouldn't be a theme in children's entertainment because it's just heavy and something that seems too much for them to understand, at least without guidance from their parents. But this announcement was actually met with vitriol from gay Twitter. Understandably, they're upset that when Disney features gay romance in their films for children, for instance, the kiss scene in Lightyear, conservatives say that they're pushing a gay agenda on kids. And they're like, well, how is this any different? And here were some of the responses. Grooming and sexualizing our children with straggit birthing propaganda. They're calling us straggots now. Another one said this looks like soulless het slop. Another one satirically said, my 3-year-old granddaughter looked at me with her innocent eyes and said, Grandma, is it normal for a woman to love a man? Disgusting. Forcing my granddaughter to see this repulsive hetero propaganda. A kid shouldn't be forced upon these views at such a young age. Another one said, children don't need to see this heterosexual ideology. Keep this heterosexual shit away from me. Disney is making propaganda for the straights now. I will be boycotting. And another one said, God forbid there's a queer couple and they're pushing sexuality content to children. I can't. If it were a gay couple, MAGA would instantly whine about it. And another complained, I sincerely think that the movie can be beautiful and all, but the heterosexuals who complain about the LGBT propaganda for a kiss scene are now making a heterosexual movie about reproduction for children, and we should accept it. It's an effing joke. And another one said, I'm tired of the whole, it's based on the director's life shit. The guy who lost his baby. People used to defend Disney/Pixar. They did that with Elemental too. Which stories are told is a deliberate choice. It's not random. They refuse to tell LGBT stories, but we're supposed to just be quiet about it? This is news to me. Disney refuses to tell LGBT stories? Okay, I didn't...
I remember when that became the reason why people supposedly didn't go see Lightyear.
there was Lightyear, but there was also that other Disney animated movie, I think called Strange World. Remember that one?
But nobody saw
with a
that
gay
one.
protagonist, which also nobody saw. But they tried
Or was
to
that
tell
was that-
LGBT
no,
stories.
Elemental was the one that ended up doing better than people thought because it
Yes,
legged out
Elemental-
to a decent return. But Strange Worlds was the one that bombed.
Right.
I think.
And now knowing the context of how this story came to be, all of these people just look like raging pieces of shit sociopaths.
I mean, but they don't see this as any different than the conservatives who are boycotting because to them what they live is normal, but to you what you live is not, even though, that's not true.
Well, they're like, how is this any different? Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it is different. And Snoop Dogg so astutely pointed out that the content involving LGBT themes for kids is inherently confusing. Kids, they do have more critical thinking skills than we give them credit for.
He
and the
backtracked on
obvious
that, too.
question, he did backtrack,
Like-
but the obvious question on their minds is, wait a minute, how do two men have a baby?
Yeah.
Can you explain that to me, Grandpa? They're in the theater with Snoop Dogg, and he's like, I'm not ready to have this conversation with you right now.
Yeah.
Kids are logical and they make judgments based on their real world experience, which is obviously that only men and women can have babies. And when they're exposed to LGBT themes or stories in their entertainment, it's naturally something that disrupts and confuses their development. So yeah, it is different, and it's not a double standard. It's just a standard.
So if you're looking for like a light at the end of the tunnel for something like this, first of all, this is a short and it's not a regular movie anyways. But if it was, the issue here is that when stories like Strange Worlds or Lightyear fail, look, you could say there's any number of reasons. Certainly Lightyear had a million things working against it beyond just, their LGBTQ storyline, which was put in there, which might bother some, doesn't bother others. More people were wondering why Buzz Lightyear looked like a dirty cop and why he wasn't being voiced by Tim Allen. Right? But in general, if a story is told in that realm and it fails, they will chalk that up to it not being a large enough amount of the population to make a dent in the box office. Whereas if a story like this fails, it's not going to be because people boycotted it. It's just not. It's going to fail for other reasons.
Because it isn't marketed well, or the
Yes.
fact that it's a short film made for streaming. It is a vanity project, and
And I agree with your point. Like a lot of the times, it's not necessarily the best form of storytelling to do self-insert characters because the creativity is oftentimes hindered when you're tying it to a real-world experience. Now, that doesn't mean you can't draw from real-world experience to tell stories. That's obviously inherent to the storytelling process. Makes perfect sense. But a lot of times now, what people feel like, the reason they feel like they don't connect with the characters isn't because they don't look like them, or because they don't sound like them, or they didn't have the same socioeconomic upbringing as them. It's because it was written with such a small audience in mind that it doesn't have a wide enough appeal to anyone. I was doing a video today, and I ended up scrapping it and getting rid of it, about girl bosses and some examples of why I think why giving the examples of Ripley is always so they always mention Ripley or Kill Bill or Sarah Connor. I'm like, yeah, but those are like the action hero versions of that. The real reason, the real girl bosses that actually worked were characters that had more intrinsic real world jobs and things like that. And the examples I gave, where I was rewatching Necessary Roughness with Callie Thorne, where she plays she plays a therapist who works for a professional football team. She's a newly single mother. Husband was a cheater, and she's back on the dating market trying to balance life and a new job and kids. And then you have examples like Lisa Cuddy, House, who's a professional woman, head of a hospital, but always wanted a family and, had to deal with the fact that she was infertile and all this stuff. Those storylines can appeal to a wide range of people. It's not so specific to one person that nobody who's watching could be like, I don't get it. Like, it's tied into other stories. But if it's specifically about a miscarriage, it runs the risk of being so specific to that person, especially if they write the responses that the behavior the character embodies to how they actually were, that they lose the ability to tell a larger story to an audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, honestly, I just feel like from reading how this came to pass, they were going to feel like a-holes if they didn't let him
make it.
But I only pointed out just to be fair, right? Because Turning Red is supposed to tell the story of what it's like to hit puberty as a second generation Asian immigrant and feel shame about your menstrual cycle. And I don't know. It was really a self-insert that was incredibly specific to this director's experience.
We need more like stories about what it's like to hit puberty with like mountains of white guilt.
I'm just pointing out, like, they should veer away from the self-insert stories, and that probably isn't a recipe for success. And I'm only saying that to be fair. But the response from these ideologues is more telling about who they are as people and the quality of their character, that they would respond with such vitriol. They are essentially trying to gatekeep the entire concept of, you know, having a happy relationship away from straight people. And again, we're in a really bad place if you're going to conflate the entire phenomenon of human reproduction with right-wing propaganda. If you're going to politicize the idea of starting a family, that means you're the problem.
Ethan Miller says, miscarriages are stupid common though, Brett. Yeah, okay, so that's actually a good point. So the thing is, though, is like the story examples that I gave were about like someone's home life or desire for a family as it relates to larger, you know, elements of their life, like work or other relationships and things. When the story is laser focused on one thing, and especially something so traumatic, I guess the biggest compliment you could give it is that it almost works better as a short story because it's such heavy subject matter that doing so on a larger scale might be even more difficult to do.
Let me point out a good example of it that was appropriate for an audience of children, and it was incredibly successful. Okay. There was a depiction of a miscarriage in the movie Up in 2009. And it was done incredibly well in a way that the adults in the audience understand what's going on. The children in the audience are introduced to the idea in an appropriate way that isn't ham-fisted and isn't too heavy for that audience either. So that I can point out as a positive example. And it's true, like, that miscarriages are more common than people know.
Absolutely.
It's, I believe, like 1 in 5 pregnancies is miscarried. It is a very common experience. However, if the short film's purpose is to tell this guy's story specifically, then it is about him and his life and his marriage. It's not about something that's relatable to other people.
Another example I'll give for that is like, okay, so say you do it in a television show, right? You've spent more time, assuming that the pilot episode doesn't open up with a miscarriage. The idea is like you've spent time with these characters. You've built some type of quasi connection with their behavior because you've seen them through a bunch of different things, interactions at work, interactions with loved ones. You've grown to, in some way, shape, or form, care about what happens to them. So when something like that does happen, yes, it's traumatic, but it serves the purpose of the story and draws on an emotional connection that you built with them earlier.
Right.
If all you're doing is telling a short story where the long and the short of it, for lack of a better word, is just the trauma, you're basically just, it's I'm gonna avoid like bad language here. It's rough. It's not a good, it's harder to get involved.
Well, the reason they depicted the miscarriage in the masterful way that they did in Up is to give the background for the character of Carl, the old man, where he, you know, then you're introduced to him after the course of events where he you know, has this lovely marriage with his wife, and then he's a widower, and you're introduced to him at this point in his life where he is this grumpy old man who's jaded, and then he meets the whimsical young boy that he goes on an adventure with, and then he develops a sort of like paternal relationship with the young boy. That's how it adds context and why it belongs in the story. But if the entire point of the movie Up was depicting him and his wife losing a baby, that would not be the right way to go about it.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.